In the late 1680s, inside his rooms at Trinity College, Cambridge, Isaac Newton sat copying out a Latin text he believed contained the original wisdom of creation. Not the Principia, not the Optics, but something older still. He titled his English version with the line, "'Tis true without lying, certain and most true," and he kept it private for the rest of his life. The manuscript still sits in the King's College Library, catalogued as Kane's Manuscript 28. The text Newton was translating is called the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus, and the man who invented modern physics thought it was the key to everything. That is the puzzle worth sitting with for a moment. Newton was not a credulous man. He spent his career dismantling Aristotelian physics, formalizing the calculus, and explaining the motion of the planets with 3 short laws. And yet, in the same years he was writing the Principia, he was also keeping a private translation of a short Hermetic text, a document barely longer than a page, that he annotated and commented on for the rest of his life. The economist John Maynard Keynes, who acquired Newton's alchemical papers at auction in 1936, and later donated them to King's College, famously called Newton not the first of the Age of Reason but the last of the magicians. Kane's Manuscript 28 is one of the reasons he said it. To understand why Newton took this small text so seriously, you have to follow the document backward through 9 centuries of transmission. The chain is long, and at every link, the picture changes a little. The earliest extant version of the Emerald Tablet sits at the end of an Arabic treatise called the Kitab Sir al-Khaliqa wa Sanat al-Tabiya, the Book of the Secret of Creation and the Art of Nature. The treatise is attributed to a figure called Balinas, the Arabic rendering of Apollonius of Tyana, a 1st-century Greek philosopher and wonder-worker. Scholars who have studied the text place its composition somewhere between the late 700s and the early 800s of the Common Era, in the early Abbasid Caliphate, possibly under the reign of Al-Mamun. Inside the treatise, Balinas frames the tablet as a found document. He claims he discovered it in a vault beneath a statue of Hermes in his native Tyana, clutched in the hands of an old corpse seated on a golden throne. The story is almost certainly fictional, but the text it frames is the oldest copy of the tablet we possess. Around the same period, the Arabic alchemical corpus attributed to Jabir ibn Hayyan, known to medieval Europe as Geber, also references the tablet. Modern scholarship now treats the Jabirian corpus as the work of an anonymous school of writers, probably 9th and 10th century, rather than a single 8th century figure. But the inclusion of the tablet inside the Jabirian writings tells us something useful. By the early medieval Islamic world, the Emerald Tablet was already considered a foundational alchemical document, worth quoting, worth preserving, worth attributing to a sage older than recorded history. From the Arabic world, the text moved west. In the middle of the 12th century, a Spanish priest named Hugo of Santalla, working in the cathedral city of Tarazona in northern Spain, produced a Latin translation of the Book of the Secret of Creation. His Latin version, sometimes dated to the years around 1145, brought the tablet into the bloodstream of medieval European alchemy. Other Latin translations followed. By the late Middle Ages, the Tabula Smaragdina, as the Latin world called it, was being copied, glossed, and commented upon in monasteries and universities, from Paris to Padua. 500 years after Hugo, a copy of one of those Latin versions ended up on Newton's desk in Cambridge. So what does the document actually say? The text is brief, no longer than a single page, structured as a series of declarative statements without argument or proof. It opens with the line Newton translated as "'Tis true without lying, certain and most true." Then its famous proposition. That which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is below, to do the miracles of the one thing. This is the as above so below formula. And it would echo through Western esoteric literature for the next 900 years. The tablet then describes a cosmogony in miniature. All things, it says, were made from one thing by the mediation of one, and so all things have their birth from this one thing by adaptation. It names the elemental parents of the one thing in language that is half poetic and half operational. The sun is its father, the moon is its mother, the wind has carried it in its belly, the earth is its nurse. From this one thing, properly worked, comes what the tablet calls the father of all perfection in the whole world, the medicine of every imperfect thing, the agent that can transmute the gross into the subtle. The closing passage makes a striking claim. The text promises that whoever masters this operation, the operation of the sun, will possess the glory of the whole world, and all obscurity will flee from him. The tablet then signs itself, in some versions, with the line that is complete which I have said concerning the operation of the sun. That is the document, a short cosmological statement, a recipe and code, and a boast. For medieval and early modern alchemists, every line of this text was loaded. The one thing, the prima materia, was the universal substrate they believed underlay all matter. The operation of the sun was the alchemical process, often associated with the production of the philosopher's stone. The phrase "as above, so below" was understood as the foundational principle of correspondence. The idea that the same patterns repeat across every level of reality, from the heavens to the body to the laboratory vessel. To master the small was, in some sense, to master the large. If you are finding this useful, there are more videos like this on the channel. Now, the harder question: who actually wrote this document, and is any of it really ancient? There is no surviving Egyptian source. There is no surviving Greek source. There is no Latin version that predates Hugo of Santalla in the 12th century. The earliest copy in any language sits at the end of an 8th or 9th century Arabic treatise written under the pseudonym of a 1st century Greek wonderworker, who claimed he found it in a vault beneath a statue. The chain of attestation does not reach into antiquity. It begins, as far as anyone can document, in the early Islamic world. The figure to whom the tablet is attributed, Hermes Trismegistus, has a similar problem. The thrice-great Hermes was a Hellenistic composite formed when Greek settlers in Ptolemaic Egypt identified their messenger god Hermes with the Egyptian god of writing and wisdom, Thoth. The two were worshipped together at Hermopolis, the Greek name for the old Egyptian city of Khmenu. The Hermetica, the body of texts attributed to him, was largely composed in Greek in the first 3 centuries of the Common Era. In 1614, the classical scholar Isaac Casaubon analyzed the language of these texts and concluded that they were the product of late antiquity, not of ancient Egypt. That dating has held up. The Hermes who supposedly authored the Emerald Tablet was, almost certainly, a literary persona invented by Greco-Egyptian writers 1,000 years after the pharaohs of the Old Kingdom were dust. This is the part of the story that requires a steady hand. The Emerald Tablet, taken as an ancient Egyptian document, overreaches. The provenance does not hold. There is no inscription on a tomb wall, no papyrus in a desert cache, no temple library scroll that contains it. The earliest version is Arabic, the earliest commentary is medieval, and the figure of Hermes Trismegistus is a Hellenistic invention. And yet Newton kept his copy. So did almost every serious European alchemist for 5 centuries before him. Why? Part of the answer is that early modern natural philosophers were not yet drawing the sharp line we now draw between science and esotericism. Newton's contemporaries Robert Boyle and Robert Hooke also worked on alchemical problems. The transmutation of base metals into gold was, in their world, a legitimate research question. Behind it sat a serious metaphysical claim. If all matter shares a common substrate, the prima materia, then in principle one form of matter could be reorganized into another. The tablet, with its talk of the one thing from which all things descend, was a compressed statement of that metaphysics. Newton, reading the Latin, was not reading mysticism for its own sake. He was reading what he took to be an ancient theoretical text on the structure of matter. Newton's commentary on the tablet, also preserved in Kane's manuscript 28, is dense with annotation. He marked passages, suggested glosses, and tried to map the obscure Latin term telesmi onto a coherent operational meaning. He chose to render it as the father of all perfection in the whole world, sidestepping the literal sense that had baffled earlier commentators. This was not a casual exercise. The notes show a working scientist treating an old text the way he treated the Principia, line by line, looking for the underlying structure. Part of the answer is also that the tablet operates on 2 levels at once, and the alchemists knew it. On the surface, it is a recipe for working with substances in a vessel. Beneath that, it is a parable about the transformation of the soul. The same operation that purifies metal can, in the right hands, purify the practitioner. The work in the laboratory and the work on the self were understood as mirrors. Carl Jung, writing in the middle of the 20th century, picked up exactly this thread. In his late work, especially the volume titled Mysterium Conscientius, he argued that alchemy was, at its core, a projection of unconscious psychological processes onto chemical substances. The quest for the philosopher's stone was a quest for psychological wholeness. The Hermetic principle of correspondence, as above so below, mapped almost perfectly onto his archetypal psychology. For Jung, the unconscious and the cosmos operated by the same patterns, and the tablet was a compressed statement of that intuition. Jung's interest was not antiquarian. He was trying to recover a vocabulary for inner work that mainstream 20th century psychology had lost. The alchemists, he argued, had been describing the same psychological processes his patients were undergoing in analysis, only in symbolic and projected form. The conjunctio, the marriage of opposites, was the alchemical figure for the integration of conscious and unconscious, masculine and feminine, light and shadow. The tablet's prima materia became, in Jung's reading, the raw stuff of the psyche itself. He returned to the Hermetic corpus repeatedly in his later years and gave it a place in modern thought that academic philosophy of his era was largely unwilling to. From Jung, the phrase "as above, so below" entered modern circulation. It now appears in songs, in films, in tattoos, in self-help books, in occult fiction. The majority who use it today have never read the tablet, never heard of Hugo of Santalla, never thought about 9th-century Abbasid alchemists. The phrase has taken on a life of its own, that is, in its own way, evidence of the tablet's reach. Which brings the story back to where it started. Newton in Cambridge, late 1680s, copying out a Latin text into English by candlelight. He was not alone in taking it seriously. He was at the end of a long line of European readers who treated the document as one of the most important pieces of esoteric writing ever transmitted into the West. He was also at the beginning of a transition. Within a generation of his death, European natural philosophy would professionalize, draw its boundaries, and politely usher alchemy out of the laboratory. The Emerald Tablet would be inherited by occultists, theosophists, Jungians, and the assorted later traditions that still cite it today. Mainstream science would forget it. But the document itself remains. A short text, no longer than a page, that appears in our historical record in the 9th-century Arabic of an anonymous writer using the name of a 1st-century Greek philosopher, attributed to a Hellenistic composite of Greek and Egyptian gods, translated into Latin by a 12th-century Spanish priest, and copied into English by Isaac Newton in a private notebook he never published. Every link in that chain is verifiable. The deeper claim, that it preserves the wisdom of pharaonic Egypt, is not. That tension is the honest place to leave the tablet. Read as the document its supporters claim, it overreaches. The Egyptian provenance is almost certainly fictional. The signature is borrowed. The lineage is shorter than the legend says. But read as a piece of compressed esoteric philosophy that has shaped Western occult and alchemical thought for 9 centuries, the tablet still earns its place. The as above so below formula remains one of the clearest statements of the principle of correspondence ever written. The recipe as parable structure became a template for Western alchemy. The image of the one thing from which all matter descends prefigured, in metaphor, ideas that would only become physically rigorous many centuries later. Newton kept his translation private. He never published Cain's manuscript 28, never let his contemporaries know how deeply he had read the Hermetic corpus, never quite reconciled the magus inside him with the natural philosopher he showed to the Royal Society. After his death, the alchemical papers were boxed up and forgotten until Keynes bought them at auction 2.5 centuries later. They are now searchable online, freely available,